Vietnam's external struggles has been recognized by the world as one of the most heroic pages in human history.
Spanning over 1,000 years of defeating northern feudal dynasties, the Vietnamese People's Army continued to shock the world. After the resounding victories of the Dien Bien Phu campaign in 1954 and the Great Spring Victory in 19... However, right after the country was unified, while the entire people were joyfully escaping a century-long war and the nation began reconstruction, no one expected that we would have to take up arms again to fight against the attacks of the Khmer Rouge along the entire southwestern border of the homeland. So, how did the process of the Vietnamese People's Army advancing to fight the Khmer? Let's explore together in just 5 minutes of today.
Part 1. The origin of a dark regime.
Today, most of us understand the Khmer Rouge as a genocidal force that caused many crimes against both Cambodia and Vietnam.
However, few may know that this force is more complex than we think, and not everyone in the Khmer Rouge was a ferocious demon.
Regarding the name Khmer Rouge, in Khmer it is Khmer Krahan, the term coined by Prince Norodom Sihanouk, who for the left-wing Khmer forces active in Cambodia in the 1950s. In essence, the concept of Khmer Rouge initially was not negative. It referred to Khmers in fall of communism, but after coming to power in April 1975, the term gradually came to denote a force that committed genocide against its own people, and followed extreme, fanatical nationalism under democratic Kampuchea. In reality, the Khmer Rouge was formed and developed based on a combination and struggle among various Khmer forces. The first force was the armed Khmer Asaric anti-French groups in Cambodia, under the leadership of the Indo-Chinese Communists. In April 1950, the first National Congress of the Khmer Asaric movement was convened, forming a unified Asaric front. According to the decision of the Second Congress of the Indo-Chinese Communist Party in February 1951, on June 28, Cambodian revolutionaries established the Cambodian People's Revolutionary Party, abbreviated, which rose up to resist the French colonialists and achieved many important victories, contributing to forcing the French to negotiate at the Geneva Conference in 1950. After the Geneva Conference on Indochina, due to being forced to disarm on the spot for lack of liberated, and due to suppression by the Cambodian government at the time, only about 1,000 cadres of the Khmer Asaric movement, including Sun Ngoc Min, regrouped and from late 1954, the remaining members of the Khmer Asaric movement in Cambodia established a legal political party named the Prachachan Party. This party participated in the Cambodian National Assembly elections in 1955 and in the 1955 election, the Prachachan Party won 4% of the vote but did not secure a seat in the assembly. Prachachan members were often harassed and arrested by Norodom Sihanouk's people, so from 1962, the party went underground. The second force and the core forming the leadership of the Khmer Rouge was the group of Khmer students trained in France.
This force included important figures such as Salot Song, later known as Pol Pot, Yang Seri, Khieu Samphan, Sun Sen, Hu Yuan, Khoi Thuong, and others.
These students formed the Khmer Students Association in France, abbreviated as KSA, with about 200 members, but it was later dissolved by the French authorities.
By late 1956,
Hu Yuan and Khieu Samphan helped establish a group called the Khmer Student Union, with the core still being key figures from KSA. From 1953 to 1960, KSA members gradually returned to participate in revolutionary movements in Cambodia. Pol Pot returned in 1953 and joined the Urban Committee led by Tu Sam.
Khieu Samphan returned in 1959, taught at the University of Phnom Penh, and founded the influential French-language newspaper L'Observateur. S Revolutionary Party held a secret congress and later renamed itself the Workers.
After Tu Sam had disappeared in July 1962, the WPK held its second congress in February 1963 and elected Pol Pot as the party's general secretary. From here, a series of figures from the Khmer Rouge group returning from France were elected to key positions in the party, while veteran resistance figures were gradually purged. Thus, Pol Pot's group gradually consolidated all power in the party and led the left-wing movement in Cambodia until April 17, 1975, when Phnom Penh was liberated.
Internal divisions within the Khmer Rouge.
Although the Cambodian People's Revolutionary Party or KPRP was founded in 1951, internal turmoil began in 1960. Especially when Communist Party members from the Paris group returned from France and used various tactics to gain dominance in KPRP. At this time, tensions arose within KPRP, and there were deep ideological and strategic divides among its leaders. One of the first and most important conflicts was between the Paris intellectual group and the veterans over whether Norodom Sihanouk or the US was the primary enemy to defeat. While Pol Pot and Ieng Sary considered Norodom Sihanouk the greatest enemy, the veteran revolutionaries viewed the US as the most dangerous foe.
What distinguished most of the progressives trained in France from the veteran fighters of the independence struggle was their opposing views on Norodom Sihanouk's regime. Pol Pot's group tended to firmly oppose this regime, seeing it as a backward and dictatorial monarchy. As young fighters, they wanted to resist oppression.
On the other hand, being from the middle class, they disliked the feudal aspects of Norodom Sihanouk due to his personal dictatorship.
Over time, the internal Khmer Rouge split into three distinct groups.
The first group was the ultra-nationalist faction, led by Pol Pot, Ieng Sary, Son Sen, and Khieu Samphan. This group aimed to create a unique communist society in Cambodia's own style, not imitating the Soviet Union, China, Vietnam, or any other model. The second group was the pro-China faction, led by Hu Nim, Hu Yuan, Hu Chai, and Payan Prasid. This group advocated applying the Chinese Cultural Revolution model to Cambodia.
The third group was the pro-Vietnam group, including Sophine, Kao Muni, Chau Chet and others.
This group mainly consisted of veteran party members from the former Indo-Chinese Communist Party's Khmer Bureau and supporters of their international.
They supported building a socialist Cambodian state by following Vietnam's model. These three different ideologies led to each group having its own bases and power centers.
Among them, Pol Pot was initially in the northeast region and relied on the Montagnards. Phnom was in the south and southwest in the Phnom Kra, while Sophine was in the populous eastern provinces between the Mekong River and the Vietnamese border.
This Eastern Zone group were later purged by Pol Pot.
The Khmer Rouge officially came to power in Cambodia. Step by step, the Paris-trained group eliminated party members from the Cambodian People's Revolution. On July 20, 1962, General Secretary Tushamet was kidnapped from his hideout in Phnom Penh and was believed to have been killed shortly after.
The most plausible explanation for this murder is that Tushamet was a victim of the General Secretary's surroundings.
The most plausible explanation for this murder is that Tushamet was a victim of internal party conflict. The Pol Pot group never publicly denied responsibility, and all evidence, even indirect, pointed to their involvement.
This assassination, in February 1963, Pol Pot convened a party congress and was elected as the party.
It's noteworthy that they aimed to exploit the prestige of the communist movement to seize leadership of the national liberation movement in Cambodia. The Pol Pot party renamed the Cambodian Workers' Party to the Communist Party of Cambodia in 19... It can be said that Pol Pot's movement was a form of extreme nationalism because although it wore a communist cloak, it was mainly to eliminate genuine communists and actively use revolutionary language to mercilessly destroy the revolution. On March 18, 1970, the pro-American Lon Nol government staged a coup to then established the Khmer Republic regime, which essentially turned Cambodia into a new-style colony and American military. This coup caused great losses to the Cambodian people, while creating a new situation for the Cambodian Revolution. The balance between revolutionary and counter-revolutionary forces. It was Lon Nol's coup that made the relationship between Pol Pot and Norodom Sihanouk become closer. Because at this time, unlike the previous period, both the Khmer Rouge and Norodom Sihanouk shared a common enemy, Lon Nol. Norodom Sihanouk wanted to regain his leadership position and destroy Lon Nol, who had betrayed him. To achieve that, Sihanouk needed the help of the Khmer Rouge, the communist group he still considered an enemy. However, at this time, the prince had nothing in hand and no army.
Which is why he had to seek help from both Vietnam and China.
particularly through Chinese connections. Norodom Sihanouk had to compromise to cooperate with Pol, establishing the National United Front of Cambodia on March 23, 1970.
By April 1975, after 5 years of fighting, Pol Pot's forces overthrew Lon Nol and came to power in the capital Phnom Penh.
Norodom Sihanouk, as leader of the National United Front of Cambodia, became the head of state, not only of democratic Cambodia, but his position was only honorary and without real power.
Therefore, he resigned on April 4, 1976.
The Khmer Rouge's rise to power was the result of social disintegration and political conflict that occurred. When Norodom Sihanouk was overthrown, the country was suddenly plunged into the vortex of the Indochina rather than from a solid movement of social protest and political change.
That movement had developed explosively since 1970 but was not unified and lacked solid popular support.
In Cambodia, a completely Khmer Rouge government was established with Khieu Samphan as head of state, replacing Norodom Sihanouk and Pol Pot becoming prime minister, while Ieng Sary, and in January 1976, Pol Pot promulgated a new constitution, as well as established the democratic Cambodia. Proprietor China. As we mentioned above, although Pol Pot was a member of the extreme nationalists wanting to form a unique communist society in Cambodia's own style, it didn't imitate the Soviet Union, China, Vietnam, or any other model. Yet in September 1965, he secretly visited China. At that time, Prince Norodom Sihanouk was also visiting China, and relations between the two countries were at peak. However, Norodom Sihanouk didn't know that Pol Pot was also in Beijing, and it was through Pol Pot's visit that a new phase in Cambodia-China relations occurred.
That's complete shift to Mao Zedong.
Pol Pot visited China before the Cultural Revolution erupted and returned to Cambodia in early 1966, the year that marked a turning point for the Cambodian Communist Party. Assuming the position of General Secretary, Pol Pot completely changed the political program. He firmly established an independent, sovereign, self-reliant stance and clearly saw the nature of the Vietnamese.
Upon returning to Cambodia, Pol Pot launched a secret newspaper called Resmi Krahom, meaning red light.
He then directed the dissemination of 4 lessons on the 1954 Geneva Agreement and affirmed that no country would decide their destiny, while issuing a resolution to carry out armed struggle against the Norodom Sihanouk. Notably, Pol Pot's policy ran counter to the primary goal of the revolution in the Free Indochina, which was to fight and expel American imperialism and liberate Mao Zedong thought in the Cultural Revolution.
It's not wrong to say Pol Pot was a hardcore fan of Mao, as even while in France, participating in activities with the Khmer Communist student group.
Both Pol Pot and Ieng Sary revered Mao and praised his thought, while dreaming of restoring Cambodia's territory from the Angkor era. After taking leadership of Cambodia, Pol Pot increasingly revered this ideology.
On this matter, Australian journalist Wilfred Burchett wrote,
"The Khmer Rouge were obsessed with China's Cultural Revolution, as it allowed peasants to reform and elect, elevating peasants, at least in theory, to the highest level of Chinese society, purging and massacring veteran party cadres of the former national bourgeoisie who had been leniently accepted." People like Pol Pot and Sun Sen had attended study courses in Beijing during the peak of the cultural. They received a strong dose of anti-Vietnamese propaganda and transmitted it to their comrades and the leaders. Previously, China had backed Prince Norodom Sihanouk to fight against the Khmer Rouge insurgents throughout the 1960s and did not genuinely support the Cambodian insurgents, i.e., the Khmer.
After Lon Nol took power in 1970
and attempted to move closer to the US during 1971 and 1972.
However, the Khmer Rouge chose to align with Beijing because Maoism was closer to their ideological inclination. Moreover, the most important reason they leaned towards China was that they were not yet ready to stand on their own feet. S. Statement of the 11th session of the Chinese Communist Party.
That even if half of humanity were killed in war, it wouldn't matter. Pol Pot, though sailing down the slope, also declared that even if 1 million people had to be sacrificed, the party would not regret it. The party must be strong. If only 2 million Cambodians remained, the country could still be rebuilt. Not only did the Chinese government propagate Mao Zedong, but it also encouraged and aided the Khmer. Specifically, after the 1975 war, the Khmer Rouge summarized 8 factors for victory, not including Vietnam's significant multi-path. In reality, throughout the process of overthrowing Lon Nol's forces, it was the Vietnamese who first called for going to Cambodia to train and build military units for the resistance. Because at that time, Vietnam and the Khmer Rouge shared a common enemy, the US and the Phnom Penh. It was also Vietnam that repeatedly rescued Pol Pot's forces in Norodom Siem. And we were the country that transported along the Ho Chi Minh Trail some weapons and essential supplies for the Cambodian people to continue their struggle. Furthermore, the Khmer Rouge conducted a series of border incursions into the 3 neighboring countries, Vietnam, Laos. While Cambodia-China relations tightened after April 1975, when Chinese planes flew into Cambodia's
victory, and for some months, it became Cambodia.
China was also the only country with which the new regime in Phnom Penh had closely. Not long after, Beijing provided substantial military aid, ensuring the expansion of the. On April 19, 1975, while Khmer Rouge soldiers were evacuating Phnom Penh, Yang Seri, then Cambodia's foreign minister, traveled to Beijing to negotiate with China an agreement to supply 13,300 tons of weapons, to be shipped via Canton South Port instead of By May 26, 1975, Pol Pot, then Cambodia's prime minister, secretly visited Beijing again to strengthen Cambodia-China relations. Then in August 1975, Khieu Samphan, then Cambodia's head of state, visited Beijing and signed an economic cooperation agreement, under which China would provide Cambodia with $200 million in aid over 5 to 6 years. On the same occasion, Khieu Samphan also signed a joint communique condemning Following this communique, China reciprocated by sending about 20,000 advisors to Cambodia. This group helped the Khmer Rouge build an army of up to 23 divisions by 1978, with all 3 branches, Navy, Army, and Air Force. This army was fully equipped with Chinese weapons and war material, far exceeding Cambodia's economic capacity and defensive needs. However, on September 13, 1975, China granted Cambodia approximately $1 billion in non-repayable economic and military, even some immediate grants with values up to $20 million, far exceeding what was signed in August. This entire amount was publicly declared as also the mainland's largest aid package to an ally. The increase in aid to Cambodia also coincided with Beijing's sudden reduction because Vietnam was growing closer to the Soviet Union, which was in conflict with China. So they wanted to find another ally that could. Along with that, the mainland government also caused 814 violations at 102 ports. And in 1976, relations between the 2 countries were strengthened with particularly the visit to Cambodia by then General Secretary of the Communist, more notably during the visit to Cambodia by Deputy Chief of General Staff of the Chinese Liberation. The 2 sides signed a cooperation agreement that included China providing aid to Cambodia. Later in March 1976, Beijing signed a non-refundable aid agreement for Cambodia worth tens of millions of dollars. In addition to monetary and weapon aid, Beijing also strongly encouraged and supported the Khmer Rouge's insane policy to ensure Pol Pot would be their puppet. During the period from 1975 to 1978, while Beijing significantly reduced aid to developing countries, completely ending aid to Vietnam and Laos, they instead focused on increasing aid. Aid to this regime accounted for more than half of Beijing's total foreign aid. Through these aid packages, it can be seen that the People's Republic of China wanted to turn Cambodia into a springboard to serve their policy of great nation expansion. China increased military aid, employed a network of thousands of advisors to monitor all activity, encouraged Pol Pot to implement genocidal policies against the Cambodian people and provoked armed conflicts with Thailand, as well as intensified the war of aggression. Although the Vietnam-Cambodia border situation after 1975 became increasingly complex, at that time few could imagine that a state and army that had just fought alongside against the common enemy America
could become enemies of each other.
However, as early as 1963, after taking power in the Cambodian People's Revolution, Pol Pot began to show hostile attitudes and actions toward Vietnam and pro-Vietnamese Cambodian communists. At this time, Pol Pot built his passion by secretly propagating the Hanoi when signing the 1954 Geneva Agreement and circulated more than 10 documents criticizing
He approved of Pol Pot.
By 1966, Pol Pot had withdrawn the representative office from the Southern Central Office
Party and the Cambodian people.
From 1970 to 1973, when the Vietnamese army concentrated forces to fight the Americans on him, Pol Pot's soldiers caused 174 provocations, attacked rear bases, stole weapons and food supply, along with killing over 600 Vietnamese cadres and soldiers. In 1972, Pol Pot also publicly requested Vietnam to withdraw troops and took actions to expel Vietnamese residents. When the Paris Agreement on Vietnam was signed in January 1973, Pol Pot considered the signing a betrayal by Vietnam. But the Indo-Chinese Revolution and ordered propaganda agencies to organize protests against Vietnamese forces stationed. As the Cambodian Revolution approached victory, Pol Pot increasingly prepared plans to sabotage. And immediately after both countries' revolutions achieved victory, on May 1, 1975, they sent troops to invade multiple areas of Vietnamese territory. Then on May 4, 1975, the Khmer Rouge force raided Phu Quoc Island. 6 days later, this force continued to attack and captured over 500 civilians. Enraged by the Khmer Rouge's aggressive actions, the Hanoi government sent forces from Phu Quoc Island to counterattack. After a 3-day battle, we recaptured the Do Chu archipelago, after killing and capturing about 500 Khmer. However, over 500 civilians had. By June 5th, Vietnamese forces opened fire and attacked the Pulawai archipelago, about 90 kilometers northwest of the Do, where the Khmer Rouge had occupied and massacred the army of both. After 10 days of fighting, the Vietnamese army destroyed 2 Khmer Rouge battalions here and captured. But no captured civilians were found on this archipelago. Only much later did we learn that the civilians had been taken to Cao Pang Island for forced labor and were gradually killed until not a single person. Moreover, the Khmer Rouge Army also intensified encroachments in the western Sa River area, south of Highway. On the night of January 3, 1976, Khmer Rouge troops flooded into Sa village, Rao Ray Commune, Sa district, arresting. By June 1976, the Khmer Rouge reinforced forces along the border, encroached on land in Long An, Vinh Phuoc, and Thanh Dinh provinces, and carried out provocative actions. After small raids into Vietnam, the Khmer Rouge side continued to conduct 2 large-scale attacks. The first major attack occurred on the night of April 30, 1977, when Pol Pot's forces used division-level troops to unexpectedly advance. This force attacked 14 out of 16 border communes from Vinh Gia to Vinh Xuong, occupying some areas in Giang province. On the very night of April 30, 1977, Vietnam's 330th Division was ordered to conduct mobile combat. This unit coordinated with local armed forces to carry out multiple counterattacks, reclaiming.
The second major attack took place on September 25, 1977.
At this time, 9 main divisions of the Khmer Rouge Army simultaneously attacked Kinh Giang and Giang, Nong Bath, Long An, in Thanh Dinh province alone. 4 Khmer Rouge divisions captured many positions in Thanh Dinh and Thao.
To punish Pol Pot's arrogant and brutal actions, on December 31, 1977, the People's Party of Vietnam concentrated 8 divisions to launch a counterattack, destroying 5. Afterward, the army advanced 20 to 30 kilometers deep into Cambodian territory, reaching as far as Neat Ruo. This attack was seen as a warning to the Khmer Rouge. The decision to stop at a warning level was because Vietnam at that time still believed that the Khmer Rouge leadership was divided into one pro-Vietnam and one anti-Vietnam, and it was unclear which faction would gain dominance. The Vietnamese side proposed a diplomatic solution to establish a demilitarized zone along the border, but Pol Pot refused. On December 31, 1977, Pol Pot unilaterally severed diplomatic relations with Vietnam, which affirmed Pol Pot's intention to wage a full-scale war. Notably, in 1977, Pol Pot also conducted an internal purge. The purge targeted many military commanders, including Hun Sen, who was then the battalion commander of the Eastern Cambodia region. He, along with some battalion cadres, fled to Vietnam. When Vietnam prepared to attack Cambodia, Hun Sen became one of the leaders of the rebel army and government sponsored by.
Additionally, according to the Black Book on Vietnam's War and Camp published by the Democratic Kampuchea Ministry of Foreign Affairs in September 9, this document recalls the vast territory of the Angkor Empire from the 9th to the 15th centuries. The Khmer Rouge claimed that the southern region of Vietnam previously belonged to the Khmer and declared that Vietnam's possession of the Mekong Delta today is unjust, as they believed it was achieved through military invasion against the ancient Khmer Empire. Subscribe to the Gian Nigo channel so you know those exciting videos.